The storm roared like a wild beast, its fury shaking the world. Waves crashed against the jagged rocks, their white foam glowing under the pale moonlight. The wind howled, tearing through the night as if it wanted to rip the sky apart. On the edge of a cliff, a man stood, his face twisted with pain and despair. In his arms, he held a small girl, no older than 8, her wide eyes filled with confusion and fear. "I'm sorry," the man whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Before the girl could say a word, he did the unthinkable. With a cry that was swallowed by the storm, he threw her into the sea. Her tiny body disappeared into the dark, churning water, swallowed by the waves. The man fell to his knees, sobbing, his hands clutching his head as if trying to tear out the guilt that consumed him. But the girl was a fighter. She surfaced, gasping for air, her small arms flailing against the cold, relentless waves. The current pulled her under again and again, but she fought with everything she had. Her cries for help were lost in the storm, drowned by the thunder and the wind. Not far away, a luxury yacht cut through the storm. On its deck stood a man in his late 50s, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. He was a millionaire, a self-made man who had everything money could buy but carried a void in his heart. He had been sailing alone, trying to escape the memories of a past he could never forget. As he peered through the rain, he saw something, a small, struggling figure in the water. Without a second thought, he jumped into the sea. The icy water shocked his body, but he swam with determination, his strong arms cutting through the waves. He reached the girl just as she was about to go under again. Grabbing her, he pulled her close and swam back to the yacht, his heart pounding with fear and hope. On the deck, he laid her down gently. She was pale, her lips blue from the cold, but she was alive. He wrapped her in a thick blanket and called for his staff to bring warm water and towels. As he knelt beside her, she opened her eyes slightly and looked at him. Her voice was barely a whisper, but the words she spoke hit him like a thunderbolt. "Grandpa, save me." Then her eyes closed, and she fell unconscious. The millionaire froze, his mind racing. He had no grandchildren. He had lost his only daughter years ago in a tragic accident. Who was this girl, and why did she call him Grandpa? The storm raged on, but inside the yacht, a deeper storm was brewing, one of mystery, emotion, and a connection that defied explanation. The millionaire stared at the girl, his heart aching with a strange mix of hope and fear. He didn't know it yet, but those 3 words had just changed everything. The millionaire sat by the girl's bedside, his eyes never leaving her pale face. She was sleeping now, her breathing steady but shallow. The storm outside had calmed, leaving behind a quiet, eerie stillness. His mind, however, was anything but calm. Those 3 words, "Grandpa, save me," echoed in his head, stirring emotions he had buried long ago. He leaned back in his chair, his thoughts drifting to the past. Years ago, he had been a different man, a man with dreams, a family, and a future full of promise. But life had a way of tearing things apart. He remembered his daughter, his only child, with her bright smile and endless curiosity. She had been his world, his reason for everything. But one fateful day, she was gone, taken from him in a tragic accident that left him broken and alone. After her death, he had thrown himself into his work, building an empire from nothing. He became one of the richest men in the world, but no amount of money could fill the void in his heart. He had no family left, no one to share his success with. He lived in a mansion filled with priceless art and luxury, but it felt empty, like a shell of a life. And now, this girl. Who was she? Why did she call him Grandpa? He couldn't shake the feeling that she was connected to him in some way. Her locket, the one she wore around her neck, had caught his attention earlier. It was simple but elegant, with a small picture inside. He hadn't opened it yet, but something about it felt familiar. As the night wore on, the millionaire's staff moved quietly around the room, bringing warm drinks and fresh blankets. They were used to his solitary ways, but this was different. They could see the change in him, the way he looked at the girl with a mix of protectiveness and confusion. Finally, the girl stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked around the room, her gaze landing on the millionaire. For a moment, she seemed confused, but then her eyes filled with tears. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're safe," the millionaire said gently. "I found you in the water. Do you remember what happened?" The girl nodded slowly, her small hands clutching the blanket. "My dad, she couldn't finish the sentence, her voice breaking into a sob. The millionaire's heart ached for her. He reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "It's okay," he said. "You don't have to talk about it right now. Just rest." But the girl shook her head. "I have to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mom, she told me about you. She said if I was ever in trouble, I should find you." The millionaire's breath caught in his throat. "Your mom? Who is your mom?" The girl hesitated, her eyes filling with fear. "I can't say. Not yet. But she told me you would protect me." The millionaire's mind raced. Could it be possible? Could this girl be his granddaughter? He thought of his daughter, the one he had lost so many years ago. Had she survived? Had she had a child? The questions swirled in his mind, each one more urgent than the last. He looked at the girl's locket again, his hand trembling as he reached for it. "May I?" he asked softly. The girl nodded, and he carefully opened the locket. Inside was a small photograph of a woman, her face smiling and full of life. The millionaire's heart stopped. It was her. His daughter. She was older, but there was no mistaking her. The resemblance was uncanny. Tears filled his eyes as he stared at the picture. "This is your mom?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. The girl nodded again. "Yes. She said you would know her." The millionaire closed the locket and held it tightly in his hand. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, joy, grief, anger, and hope. His daughter was alive. She had a child. And now, this child was here, in his care, needing his protection. But where was his daughter? Why had she never reached out to him? And why had the girl's father tried to kill her? The questions were endless, but one thing was clear: he would do whatever it took to keep this girl safe and uncover the truth. As the girl drifted back to sleep, the millionaire made a silent promise. He would find the answers, no matter what it took. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose, a reason to fight. This girl, his granddaughter, had brought him back to life. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the mansion, casting a warm glow over the room. The girl was awake now, sitting up in bed with a cup of hot chocolate in her hands. She looked small and fragile, but there was a quiet strength in her eyes that the millionaire couldn't ignore. He sat across from her, his expression gentle, but curious. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better," she said softly. "Thank you for saving me." The millionaire nodded, his mind still racing with questions. He wanted to know everything, about her mother, her father, and why she had ended up in the sea. But he knew he had to be careful. She was just a child, and she had been through something unimaginable. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked. The girl hesitated for a moment, then said, "My name is Lily." "Lily," the millionaire repeated, the name feeling familiar somehow. "That's a beautiful name." She smiled faintly, but her eyes were still filled with sadness. The millionaire noticed the locket around her neck again, the one with the picture of her mother, his daughter. He wanted to ask more about it, but he didn't want to push her too hard. "Lily," he said gently, "you said your mom told you about me. Can you tell me more about her?" Lily's grip tightened around her cup, and she looked down at her hands. "My mom, she was always talking about you. She said you were a good man, someone who would protect me if anything ever happened to her." The millionaire's heart ached at her words. "Where is your mom now?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Lily's eyes filled with tears. "She's gone. She got sick, and she didn't get better." The millionaire felt a pang of grief, but also confusion. If his daughter had passed away, why had she never reached out to him before? Why had she kept Lily a secret? There were so many questions, but he could see that Lily was struggling. He didn't want to overwhelm her. "I'm so sorry, Lily," he said softly. "I didn't know about you or your mom. But I'm here now, and I'll do everything I can to keep you safe." Lily looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Do you promise?" "I promise," he said firmly. "Your family, Lily. And family takes care of each other." For the first time since he had found her, Lily smiled, a small, tentative smile, but it was enough to warm the millionaire's heart. He knew there was still so much to uncover, but for now, he was focused on making sure Lily felt safe and loved. Later that day, the millionaire decided to investigate further. He called his most trusted assistant and gave him a task: find out everything about Lily's father and what had led to that terrible night on the cliff. He also asked for information about his daughter, where she had been all these years, how she had lived, and why she had never contacted him. As he waited for answers, the millionaire spent time with Lily, trying to learn more about her life. She was shy at first, but slowly, she began to open up. She told him about her favorite books, her love for animals, and how she used to help her mom in the garden. The millionaire listened intently, hanging on to every word. It was as if he was getting to know his daughter all over again, through Lily. But there was one thing Lily refused to talk about: her father. Whenever the millionaire brought him up, she would clam up, her eyes filling with fear. It was clear that whatever had happened between them was deeply traumatic. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Lily finally broke the silence. "My dad, he wasn't always like this," she said quietly. "He used to be kind. But then something changed. He started acting strange, like he was scared all the time. And then, he did what he did." The millionaire's heart broke for her. "Do you know why he changed?" he asked. Lily shook her head. "I don't know. But I think someone was making him do bad things." The millionaire's mind raced. Was someone threatening Lily's father? Was that why he had thrown her into the sea? The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but there were still too many gaps. As the days passed, the millionaire grew more determined to uncover the truth. He knew that whatever had happened, it was bigger than he had initially thought. And he knew that Lily's safety depended on him finding the answers. One night, as he sat in his study, his assistant called with an update. "Sir, we found something," he said. "It's about Lily's father. He's in trouble, deep trouble. And it's connected to someone from your past." The millionaire's heart pounded. "Who?" he asked. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "It's someone you know very well. Someone you thought was gone." The millionaire's blood ran cold. He had a feeling he knew exactly who it was. And if he was right, the danger was far from over. The father sat in a dimly lit motel room, his hands trembling as he clutched a cheap cup of coffee. The room was small and dingy, with peeling wallpaper and a flickering light bulb. It was a far cry from the life he had once known, but it was all he could afford now. He was on the run, haunted by the memory of what he had done. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the image of his daughter falling into the sea. But it was no use. The guilt was like a weight on his chest, crushing him with every breath. He had never wanted to hurt her. She was his world, his everything. But he had been left with no choice. Flashbacks of the past few months played in his mind like a nightmare. It had started with a phone call, a voice on the other end, cold and menacing. "You owe us," the voice had said. "And if you don't pay, we'll take what's most precious to you." At first, he had tried to ignore the threats. He had thought it was just a scare tactic, a way to pressure him into paying a debt he didn't even owe. But then the calls had become more frequent, more aggressive. Strange men had started following him, watching his every move. He had tried to protect Lily, keeping her close and never letting her out of his sight. But the fear had consumed him, turning him into a shadow of the man he once was. One night, the unthinkable had happened. He had come home to find Lily gone, her room empty. Panic had set in as he searched the house, calling her name. Then his phone had rung, and that same cold voice had spoken. "We have her. If you want her back, you'll do exactly as we say." The instructions had been clear: take Lily to the cliff and throw her into the sea. It was a test, they had said, a way to prove his loyalty. If he refused, they would kill her. If he complied, they would let her live. He had been torn, his mind screaming that there had to be another way. But in the end, fear had won. He had done what they asked, hoping against hope that they would keep their word. But now, sitting in that motel room, he wasn't sure if he had made the right choice. He had no way of knowing if Lily was alive or if the men had lied to him. The thought of her alone in the cold, dark sea was unbearable. He had to find out what had happened to her. He had to make things right. The father stood up, his resolve hardening. He couldn't stay hidden forever. He had to face the consequences of his actions, no matter how painful they were. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door, his mind made up. He would go back to the cliff, to the place where it had all happened. Maybe there, he would find some clue, some sign of what had become of Lily. As he stepped outside, the cold night air hit him like a slap. The streets were empty, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. He kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone he passed. He knew the men were still out there, watching, waiting. But he didn't care anymore. He had nothing left to lose. When he reached the cliff, the wind was howling, just like it had been that night. He stood at the edge, looking down at the dark, churning water below. His heart ached as he remembered Lily's face, her wide eyes filled with fear. He had failed her, and he would never forgive himself for that. But as he turned to leave, something caught his eye, a small piece of fabric caught on a jagged rock. He knelt down and picked it up, his hands shaking. It was a piece of Lily's dress. His heart leaped with hope. If her dress had been caught here, maybe she had survived. Maybe someone had found her. The father's mind raced. He had to find out who had taken her. He had to make sure she was safe. But he knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed help, someone who had the resources to take on the men who had destroyed his life. And then it hit him, the millionaire. He had heard stories about the man, about his wealth and his power. If anyone could help him, it was him. But would he? After what he had done, would the millionaire even listen to him? There was only one way to find out. The father took a deep breath, his mind made up. He would go to the millionaire, tell him everything, and beg for his help. It was a long shot, but it was the only chance he had. As he walked away from the cliff, the father felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure: he would do whatever it took to save his daughter. The millionaire sat in his study, staring at the photograph in Lily's locket. It was his daughter, without a doubt. Her smile, her eyes, it was her. But how? How had she survived all these years without him knowing? And why had she kept Lily a secret? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. His assistant entered, holding a file. "Sir, we found something," he said, placing the file on the desk. "It's about Lily's father." The millionaire opened the file, his eyes scanning the information. The man's name was David, a former engineer who had fallen on hard times. He had no criminal record, but there were reports of him being harassed by unknown individuals in the months leading up to the incident at the cliff. The millionaire's brow furrowed as he read on. It seemed David had been caught in something far bigger than himself. "There's more," the assistant said. "We've tracked his movements. He's been staying in motels, moving from place to place. But last night, he was seen near the cliff where you found Lily." The millionaire's heart skipped a beat. "Is he still there?" "We're not sure," the assistant replied. "But we're monitoring the area. If he shows up again, we'll know." The millionaire nodded, his mind racing. He needed to find David to understand what had driven him to such a desperate act. But more than that, he needed to know if Lily was truly safe. The men who had threatened David were still out there, and they were connected to someone from his past, someone dangerous. As he pondered his next move, Lily entered the room, her small footsteps barely making a sound. She looked at him with those big, trusting eyes, and his heart melted. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. The millionaire forced a smile. "I'm fine, Lily. Just thinking." She walked over to him and climbed onto his lap, her small hands clutching his shirt. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know," he said, wrapping his arms around her. "But I promise, no one will hurt you again. I'll protect you." Lily nodded, but her eyes were still filled with fear. The millionaire knew he had to act fast. He couldn't let her live in fear any longer. Later that day, the millionaire received another call from his assistant. "Sir, we've found him. David is at the cliff. He's alone." The millionaire's heart pounded. This was his chance. He grabbed his coat and headed. The millionaire and David sat in the back of a sleek black car, speeding through the city streets. The millionaire's assistant was at the wheel, his eyes focused on the road. The atmosphere inside the car was tense, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. "We need a plan," the millionaire said, breaking the silence. "Victor is dangerous, and he won't hesitate to hurt Lily if he gets the chance." David nodded, his hands clenched into fists. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect her. I need to make things right." The millionaire placed a hand on David's shoulder. "You're not alone in this. We'll get through it together." The car pulled up to a nondescript building on the outskirts of the city. It was a warehouse, its windows dark and its doors locked. According to the millionaire's sources, this was one of Victor's hideouts. If they were going to find him, this was the place to start. The millionaire's assistant handed him a small earpiece. "I'll be in contact from the car," he said. "If anything goes wrong, I'll call for backup." The millionaire nodded, his expression grim. He and David stepped out of the car and approached the warehouse, their footsteps echoing in the empty street. The millionaire tried the door, but it was locked. He glanced at David, who nodded and pulled out a small tool from his pocket. Within seconds, the lock clicked open. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit, with stacks of crates and machinery filling the space. The air was thick with dust, and the only sound was the faint hum of a generator. The millionaire and David moved cautiously, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. "Stay close," the millionaire whispered. "We don't know what we're walking into." As they ventured deeper into the warehouse, they heard voices, low, muffled, but unmistakable. The millionaire gestured for David to follow, and they crept closer, staying hidden behind the crates. Peering around the corner, they saw a group of men gathered around a table, their faces hard and their voices angry. "Victor's not going to like this," one of the men said. "He wanted the girl, and now she's gone." "We'll find her," another man replied. "She can't have gone far." The millionaire's heart raced. They were talking about Lily. He glanced at David, who looked equally alarmed. They needed to act fast. The millionaire motioned for David to stay put, then stepped out from behind the crates, his voice calm but commanding. "Looking for someone?" The men turned, their eyes widening in surprise. One of them reached for a weapon, but the millionaire was faster. He pulled out a small device and pressed a button, sending a blinding flash of light through the room. The men stumbled back, disoriented, giving the millionaire and David the chance to move. "Let's go," the millionaire shouted, grabbing David's arm and pulling him toward the exit. They ran through the warehouse, the sound of footsteps close behind. The millionaire's assistant was waiting outside, the car engine running. They jumped in, and the assistant sped away, leaving the warehouse and the men behind. As they drove, the millionaire's mind raced. They had gotten lucky this time, but Victor wouldn't stop. He would come after Lily again, and they needed to be ready. "We need to get Lily somewhere safe," the millionaire said. Somewhere Victor can't find her. David nodded, his face pale but determined. I know a place. It's small, out of the way. No one would think to look there. The millionaire considered this, then nodded. All right. We'll take her there. But we can't stay hidden forever. We need to take Victor down, once and for all. David looked at him, his eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you. For everything. The millionaire gave him a small smile. We're family now. And family takes care of each other. As they drove through the night, the millionaire couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Victor was out there, and he wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. But the millionaire was ready. He would do whatever it took to protect Lily and bring Victor to justice. The safe house was a small, secluded cabin deep in the woods. It was far from the city, surrounded by tall trees and silence. The millionaire had chosen this place carefully, knowing it would be difficult for Victor to find. But he also knew it was only a temporary solution. They couldn't hide forever. Inside the cabin, Lily sat by the fireplace, wrapped in a thick blanket. She looked small and fragile, but there was a quiet strength in her eyes. The millionaire and David sat across from her, their faces serious as they discussed their next move. We can't keep running, David said, his voice low. Victor won't stop until he finds us. We need to end this. The millionaire nodded. I agree. But we need a plan. Victor is dangerous, and he won't go down without a fight. Lily looked up at them, her eyes wide. What are you going to do? She asked softly. The millionaire knelt beside her, his voice gentle. We're going to make sure you're safe, Lily. No matter what it takes. She nodded, but her eyes were filled with fear. The millionaire's heart ached for her. She had been through so much, and he was determined to make sure she never had to face that kind of fear again. Later that night, the millionaire and David sat at the kitchen table, poring over a map of the city. They had marked Victor's known hideouts, trying to predict where he might strike next. The millionaire's assistant had been gathering information, and they were close to pinpointing Victor's location. If we can catch him off guard, we might have a chance, the millionaire said, his finger tracing a line on the map. But we'll need to move fast. David nodded, his jaw set with determination. I'm ready. Whatever it takes. As they finalized their plan, the millionaire's phone buzzed. It was his assistant. Sir, we've found him. Victor's at the old factory on the east side. He's alone, but he's heavily armed. The millionaire's heart pounded. This was it. Their chance to end this once and for all. We're on our way, he said, hanging up and turning to David. It's time. They gathered their things and prepared to leave, but before they could step out the door, Lily ran up to them, her eyes filled with tears. Please be careful, she said, her voice trembling. The millionaire knelt down and hugged her tightly. We will, Lily. I promise. We'll be back soon. David placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes filled with emotion. I love you, Lily. No matter what happens, remember that. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. The millionaire and David exchanged a look, their resolve hardening. They couldn't let her down. The drive to the factory was tense, the silence in the car heavy with anticipation. When they arrived, the factory loomed in the darkness, its broken windows and crumbling walls giving it an eerie, abandoned feel. The millionaire and David approached cautiously, their footsteps silent on the gravel. Inside, the factory was dark and quiet, the only sound the faint hum of machinery. They moved through the shadows, their eyes scanning for any sign of Victor. Then, a voice echoed through the empty space. I was wondering when you'd show up. The millionaire and David froze, their eyes darting toward the source of the voice. Victor stepped out of the shadows, a smug smile on his face. He was holding a gun, its barrel glinting in the dim light. You've caused me a lot of trouble, Victor said, his voice cold. The millionaire and David returned to the cabin, their minds racing with the knowledge that Victor was still out there. Lily was waiting for them, her face pale with worry. When she saw the blood on the millionaire's shoulder, her eyes filled with tears. "You're hurt," she cried, rushing to his side. The millionaire forced a smile, trying to reassure her. "It's just a scratch, Lily. I'll be fine." But the truth was, the wound was deeper than he let on. He could feel the pain with every movement, and he knew they didn't have much time. Victor was desperate, and desperate men were dangerous. The millionaire's assistant had set up a makeshift command center in the cabin, with maps, radios, and surveillance equipment covering the table. "We've got eyes on Victor," he said, pointing to a blinking dot on the map. "He's holed up in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. He's alone, but he's heavily armed." The millionaire nodded, his jaw set with determination. "This ends tonight. We'll surround the warehouse and take him down." David stepped forward, his eyes filled with resolve. "I'm coming with you." The millionaire hesitated. "David, this is dangerous. You've already been through so much." But David shook his head. "Lily is my daughter. I need to do this. For her." The millionaire saw the determination in David's eyes and knew there was no talking him out of it. "All right," he said. "But stay close, and do exactly as I say." As they prepared to leave, Lily grabbed the millionaire's hand, her small fingers trembling. "Please be careful," she whispered. "I don't want to lose you." The millionaire knelt down and looked into her eyes. "You won't lose me, Lily. I promise. We'll be back soon." With that, they left the cabin, the night air cold and heavy with tension. The drive to the warehouse was silent, each man lost in his own thoughts. When they arrived, the millionaire's team surrounded the building, their movements precise and coordinated. The millionaire and David approached the warehouse, their footsteps silent on the gravel. The door was slightly ajar, and the millionaire pushed it open. The sun rose over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the quiet countryside. The millionaire stood outside the cabin, his hands in his pockets as he watched the first light of dawn. The events of the past few days weighed heavily on his heart, but there was also a sense of peace. Victor was gone, and Lily was safe. That was what mattered. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open, and Lily stepped outside. She was wrapped in a thick blanket, her small frame dwarfed by its size. She walked over to the millionaire and stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the sunrise. "It's beautiful," she said softly. The millionaire nodded, his voice gentle. "It is. A new day, a new beginning." Lily looked up at him, her eyes filled with sadness. Is he really gone?" The millionaire knelt down so he was at her eye level, his heart aching for her. "Yes, Lily. He's gone. But he loved you very much. He gave everything to keep you safe." Tears filled Lily's eyes, and she threw her arms around the millionaire, burying her face in his chest. He held her tightly, his own tears falling as he thought of David's sacrifice. "I'm so sorry, Lily," he whispered. "But I promise, I'll always be here for you. You're not alone." They stood there for a long time, the sunrise painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. When Lily finally pulled away, she looked up at the millionaire with a small, tentative smile. "Can I call you Grandpa?" she asked. The millionaire's heart swelled with emotion. He nodded, his voice choked with tears. "Of course, Lily. I'd be honored." As the days turned into weeks, the millionaire and Lily began to build a new life together. They moved into his mansion, a place that had once felt empty but was now filled with laughter and love. Lily started school, making friends and discovering new interests. The millionaire watched her with pride, grateful for the second chance he had been given. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Lily looked up at him, her eyes thoughtful. "Grandpa," she said, "do you think my dad is watching over us?" The millionaire smiled, his heart filled with warmth. "I do, Lily. I think he's very proud of you." Lily nodded, her expression serious. "I miss him. But I'm glad I have you." The millionaire reached out and took her hand, his voice gentle. I miss him too, Lily. But we'll keep his memory alive. We'll make sure he's never forgotten. As the fire crackled in the hearth, the millionaire felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He had lost so much, but he had also gained something precious, a family. Lily had brought light back into his life, and he was determined to make every moment count. The story of the millionaire, the father, and the little girl became a tale of hope, resilience, and the power of love. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always a chance for redemption, for connection, and for new beginnings. And as the millionaire looked at Lily, her face glowing in the firelight, he knew that the greatest treasure in life wasn't wealth or power, it was the people we love and the bonds we share. Life lesson. No matter how dark life gets, there is always hope. Family, whether by blood or by choice, is the greatest treasure of all. Love, sacrifice, and resilience can overcome even the greatest challenges, and every ending is the start of a new beginning.